Hey everyone, welcome back to Horse 2 Cinema. Today, instead of a review, we're coming to the end of April, and so I kind of thought that a fun thing to do every month would be to sort of talk about my favorite first-time watches. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share with you movies that I saw for the first time this month that I rated either 4.5 stars or 5 stars on Letterboxd. Because I like reviewing, new releases, but I also, most of what I watch I feel like, did not just come out. And I'm trying to familiarize myself with, more and more movies, every month. So the first one I'm going to talk about is a movie called Dead Ringers by David Cronenberg. Cronenberg is a filmmaker I'm pretty new to, I would say. I've only seen this one and I've seen The Brood as well, which I also like. And partly that's because his films aren't super mainstream and they're kind of hard to find on normal streaming services. Your Netflix, your Hulu, stuff like that. But from what I've seen, when I've been able to find it, I really, really like what I've seen. And I think Dead Ringers is probably my favorite of those two films that I've checked out from him so far. This is a movie about twin brothers who are both gynecologists that abuse their practice and develop sexual relationships with their patients. But then when, one of the brothers is deceived by the patient, he starts to sort of descend into madness. Cronenberg is really known for body horror. I think if you mention body horror, there's probably a few filmmakers who would come up. To nowadays probably somebody like Julia Ducournau, but also, David Cronenberg is still working. He actually has a movie coming out this year. And in this movie, the body horror isn't as visceral as it is even in the movie like The Brood, or certainly not as much in a Julia Ducournau movie like T10. But I think it really works when it occurs in the really surrealist kind of sequences, and especially towards the end of the film as well, where it does get a bit gory. But I don't really think it goes as far with it as I've seen in other body horror movies. So, if you're kind of new to that genre, I feel like this would honestly be a pretty decent entry point to it. What I really like about Cronenberg is that both of his films I've seen have been really, really smart, and they're allegorical. They're both about relationships and families, but they're smart without being pretentious. Oftentimes, filmmakers can sort of talk down to their audiences, I think, where they have a vision, but they're just kind of throwing it in your face. Whereas, Cronenberg is, from what I've seen, I think he's really, he's really good about leaving things up for interpretation. And yeah, just kind of presenting it in a very non-pretentious way. There's something very sleazy and down-to-earth about a Cronenberg movie, even though it is kind of on the same level as of art house allegorical metaphor type movies as, a lot of what A24 might give you today. And probably the biggest reason to watch this movie is that Jeremy Irons plays both the twins, and he has to play two very different people. And what I love about his performance is that he's very distinct. You can obviously tell which one is which is kind of crazy because, obviously they're both him, but it's subtle. There are times where, especially early on, where you aren't quite sure which one is which. But as the film goes on and the characters start to develop, you really, it's really easy to tell them apart. So yeah, Dead Ringers is great. I highly recommend checking it out. I watched it on Canopy, which is a service you can get for free through a library card, I think. So check that out. The next movie I'm going to talk about is The Last Temptation of Christ, which was directed by Martin Scorsese. So I actually watched this on Easter. A theater near me was doing a screening of it, and so I just figured I didn't really have much else going on. I figured I'd go. And I'm not a religious person really at all, and so I wasn't really sure how much I'd be able to get out of this movie. Since I'm not a Christian, if it's just a movie that's just, intending to show reverence to Jesus or deify him, I'm not really very interested in that. But that's not what The Last Temptation of Christ is at all. It is very interested in looking at Jesus as just a person. And a lot of that has to do with the brilliant performance by Willem Dafoe, this was a really brave performance for him to take on because as you might know, when the movie came out, it was really controversial. I think it's been banned in certain countries, and a lot of the religious right-wing, were really mad about it. A lot of people who worked on the film got death threats, for example. So it was really brave for, Willem Dafoe to just sort of take on this role so I don't think anybody had ever played Jesus before in a movie. I could be wrong about that, but at least a movie of sort of this, directed by a Hollywood director of that caliber. And yeah, he really perfectly shows, kind of the humanity in Jesus. And even if you are a Christian, I think it's silly to pretend that Jesus wasn't a person, with temptations and with flaws and doubts. Like I said, I'm not religious at all, but this movie really gave me a new appreciation for thoughtful people of faith. And I think Martin Scorsese is himself. He's talked in interviews about how he used to, have kind of a religious background. I think he wanted to be a priest growing up. But also watching this movie, I sort of, developed a further, frustration with the religious right who responded very negatively to this movie. Because This movie was kind of made for religious people. You know, it was made for, I think if you are religious, you'll get more out of this movie than I will. It's definitely not like talking down to religious people or, you know, sort of trashing faith or whatever. No, it's a movie that you would definitely appreciate more if you are religious. So I watched it at a theater, and I'm not really sure where it's available on streaming. I'm sure you can like rent it or something on Apple, but I couldn't find it on any like mainstream services. The next one I'm going to talk about is Good Time, which is directed by the Safdie brothers. This was my first exposure to them. I'm sure a lot of you have either seen this or Uncut Gems or even a movie like Heaven Knows What, but I hadn't seen any of those before, and so I was really, really, you know, pleasantly surprised with what I saw. This is basically a movie about a heist gone wrong. You know, a guy and his disabled brother are essentially robbing a bank, and things go very wrong. His brother gets arrested, and so the rest of the movie is sort of one long night where Robert Pattinson's character has to try and get his brother out of jail. This may not be for everybody, but I really like the idea of movies going beyond like pure entertainment or even pure intellectual curiosity. I really like when films can make you feel something that's, you know, very visceral, but that's also very unpleasant. Like, you know, anxiety-inducing films. And that's what this movie is, because there's an electronic score that is almost constant throughout. I mean, at least it seemed that way. And it completely, like, overpowers a lot of the sound system. And normally I wouldn't really love that, but I think it kind of works here because it definitely contributes to the sort of, like, paranoia that this character is feeling and how the audience is supposed to feel as well. Robert Pattinson gives one of my favorite performances from him. I think, you know, the challenge with this role is that he's, like, completely unsympathetic, but he has to like draw the audience in and keep you interested at the same time. Like, he's a really shitty person, but at the same time you want to follow this guy throughout the film because you're interested in the decisions he makes. It's kind of like following like a friend that's like really drug ridden or something, or somebody that just keeps making one bad decision after another, and you just kind of have to go along for the ride. So yeah, I recommend it. I think it's on Hulu, maybe Netflix as well. It's a good time. The next one I'm going to talk about is The Lost City of Z, or Zed, depending on where you're from. It's a British movie, and they say Zed, so I'm going to say Zed, I guess. This is a film directed by James Gray, who also did Ad Astra, if you're familiar with that, and also movies like The Immigrant. It's a movie that actually I hadn't really heard of much before when it came out, even though it only came out in like 2017. It completely bombed at the box office. I think its budget was $30 million, it made something like $19 million. And after watching it, that kind of depressed me, because this is a really, really entertaining movie. One of the most entertaining movies I've ever seen. I think where audiences would have had problems with it is just that it's quite slow-paced for sure. James Gray definitely has an affinity for like David Lean movies, Akira Kurosawa movies, like a lot of the classics, and those movies just took their time a lot more than movies do today. But it has the scope of like a David Lean movie. It's about this guy who is sort of a British explorer who's been tasked to explore the border, I think, between Brazil and Bolivia, and he eventually, wants to find this lost city, the lost city of Zed, basically. And so you get all these great landscape shots, and shots that remind me of Apocalypse Now, kind of like this boat going down the river into like a really empty jungle. But it also has really, really interesting characters, and it takes its time with those characters to sort of, build our understanding of them. It trusts its audience to be patient with that slow pace and with that, kind of character development. And evidently from the box office sales, audiences looked at that and went, fuck you. But I also really like it because it's a movie about obsession. I reviewed Zodiac a while ago on my channel, which is one of my favorite movies ever. And that's a film where, about a guy who really gets obsessed with the case of the Zodiac killer. And, honestly, like, what it does to his own life is almost more destructive than what the Zodiac killer did to people, at least from his perspective. And this guy in Lost City of Zed, he just keeps getting sucked back in to going to the jungle where all of these dangers exist, and he's essentially one of his sons has basically grown up without knowing him because he just keeps going back to the jungle. And so yeah, it's sort of about how that obsession can sort of take away from the more important things in life, and it's fantastic. I can't believe this movie didn't do well when it came out, so check it out. I think it's on Amazon Prime. The next one I'm going to talk about is Barry Lyndon, which is directed by Stanley Kubrick. So I love Stanley Kubrick. The Shining it's a movie that really kind of got me into horror movies. It holds a very special place in my heart. 2001: A Space Odyssey is one of the greatest, movie watching experiences I've ever had. I enjoy like Doctor Strangelove, and I'd always heard that, Barry Lyndon is one of his best, but the idea of sitting down and watching a 3-hour-long movie set in, 18th century Britain, just about, a guy's rise and fall, it just kind of intimidated me for a while. But this was nothing short of, riveting from beginning to end and just absolutely masterfully made. Like the third act in particular is like, you wouldn't think this from a period piece, but it is a goddamn roller coaster of emotions. Of course, it's gorgeous looking. It won a lot of Oscars, I think, for like production design and cinematography, and that's all great. These, the direction is fantastic, especially in the war scenes. Those moving shots. It's all things that Kubrick is very well known for. But I was just really struck with like how Kubrick approached the sort of rise to power and fall from grace story that we've seen so many times before this movie, and so many times since. In a lot of ways, it really transcends that and kind of subverts usual narrative expectations. Usually in these kind of stories, we either never find the protagonist redeeming. I'm thinking of something like There Will Be Blood, where he's a piece of shit throughout. Or maybe in something like The Godfather, perhaps you could say, it's like, we kind of feel neutral about the guy early on, but then as he starts to do darker things, we view him more negatively, less redeeming. But with Barry Lyndon, as the movie goes on, I actually feel maybe a little bit more sympathy for him at the end of the movie than I do at the beginning or especially the middle. I still realize that he's a shitty person, but there are moments towards the end of the film that I think are really designed to make you feel a little bit sorry for him. And that's an uncomfortable feeling given that he's a shitty person, but at the same time, you can't help but feel that. And I really like that. I like that it kind of pushes you to a different place, especially with these kind of period piece, fall from grace movies that are often great, but sometimes a bit formulaic. So yeah, if you're looking for some kind of different, slow burn, long movie, wild ride, check out Barry Lyndon. It's also on Canopy. And lastly, I'm going to talk about David Lynch's Mulholland Drive. So I'm a big David Lynch fan. I really like Eraserhead and Blue Velvet in particular. But I was definitely intimidated by checking this out just because, what I've heard about it. People have told me it's kind of like, it's like a Donnie Darko movie where like you're not going to get a lot out of it just by watching it one time. You're going to have to revisit it a lot to really, get what it means. And honestly, like, that's true. You can't understand this movie just on one viewing, but you can get a lot out of it. Like, I think it's David Lynch's best movie just off one viewing. It's about a girl who goes to Hollywood in search of, being famous and making it in the business, and that's kind of, something that we're very used to, but it's a very, like, dark and, like, surrealistic look into how toxic that industry really is. And it kind of plays like a normal movie in, like, the first 2 hours or so. I was really kind of waiting. I was like, when does it get confusing? I mean, this is kind of, they're cutting back and forth between different timelines and stuff sometimes, but it's really not that hard to understand. And then a certain thing happens about 2 hours in, and it's like almost incoherent. It's really just, it's crazy. But it's those last 30 minutes that I really am interested in. I'm, how you view these two central characters. Are they two parts of the same person? People have a lot of different interpretations of this, and I'm sure I'll have more opinions on that as I revisit it. But all I know after one watch is that it's fascinating, and it's more so than just about any other movie I've ever seen. It's something that I want to keep coming back to. I don't know if this is something people talk about with this film a lot, but I found it terrifying. Like, it's one of the scariest movies I've ever seen that's, like, not overtly a horror movie. There's some really, really messed up imagery in it. Stuff that, like, freaked me out. That was basically a jump scare, even though I wasn't sort of intending... I don't know if it was intended to be that, but that's kind of how it affected me. But it's also just really scary in its, fucked up depictions of show business and sort of the toxic nature of that. And I think that even if you don't understand a lot of, like, the character metaphors and stuff like that on the first viewing, like, I don't think I did, I think you can still get a lot out of it as just a look into Hollywood, which is, it's really, refreshing to see something like that from somebody who primarily makes films in Hollywood. David Lynch loves to, like, pull the curtain back and really look into things that seem nice and bright on the surface, but are actually, some of the most fucked up things that exist. And that's really kind of what Mulholland Drive was for me. And so, yeah, I totally recommend it. It's on Criterion Channel. I'm not really sure where else. Maybe if you don't have that, you can just rent it on Apple or something like that. Anyway, those are 6 films that I gave either 4.5 or 5 stars to that I saw this month. Highly recommend all of them. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you like it, you can like the video down below and subscribe to the channel if you want. I've got more content coming out soon, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.